Thanks for joining. Thanks for joining the call today. Welcome to REI 101. I'm flying solo today. Austin is at, I think he's at a real estate agent conference, I think. He called me this morning. Honestly, I was on the road, wasn't paying much attention to the conversation, but thanks for joining us today, y'all. We have a uh, really good topic we're going to discuss today, and it's something that's so important when you're going into your first real estate deal or the next one. It's understanding how to budget and estimate, right? The rehab project, the rehab portion of this project, which is that can make or break your deals. So we do have I think a general contractor might be joining us here in a few minutes. Javier Mejia. I know he's done some projects with Austin and with some other people who might be on the call today. Really solid guy. I would like to get his input as well. Hopefully he can join us today, but I'm just gonna get started here and just kind of go over a few things and some important things that we talk about when we're walking through a property and really understanding, renovations. And I think one of the things that you think about when you're walking through a property is you kind of try to balance your needs, all right? Like what do you absolutely need on this project and your wants, you know? And I think a leaky roof, obviously, that is something that you absolutely need to repair, replace. But brand new cabinets in the kitchen, that might be more of a want. You know, we talked about on previous some previous calls about the 70% rule, and just a quick recap on that. The 70% rule is when you take the after repair value or the the value of the property that you want to sell it for after it's completely repaired. What that is, you take 70% of that and you subtract this renovation budget that you get, and that will help you come up with your max allowable offer, or MAO, right? But that one piece of that equation, that repair budget, is going to help you get to that offer. So if you're off by too much on this repair budget, you could end up overpaying for a property, or you could end up pricing yourself out and under offering and really not being able to have a competitive offer. So that's why it's really good to really understand when you're walking these properties with a contractor or a general contractor, or maybe you're going to do the work, is understanding like the difference between needs and wants, So there's some other things too, like for instance, whenever you're talking to a contractor and you're getting some bids from them, you want to make sure that you have a budget for like your materials, your labor, and contingency. So those are some things that sometimes we don't really plan for, but that's what it actually is, for the unexpected. So typically when we're doing our budgets for our renovations, we add about anywhere from 5 to 10, depending on how big the project is, maybe 15%. Like if it's a smaller project, we might add 10 or 15% in there. But if it's a larger project, I think about 10% might be enough, because 10% of a small project might be another 20 grand, if you have a $200,000 renovation. But it's also super important on those bigger projects like that you get a lot of the big ticket items part of your budget. So that's kind of it's like five. The big five is what we call them. We call it the roof, foundation, electrical, um, plumbing, and gosh, there's another one. See, I'm recorded, so I can't even remember what it is. But electrical, plumbing, foundation, and roof, and I'll come up with it later, guys. Sorry about that. Anyways, so you want to have your contingency in your budget as well, in case you go over, because typically you're going to go over. Um, but another few things that I want to talk about is the way we manage contractors, is we kind of have something called this 10 commandments of managing contractors. And again, that's super important. Like you're trying to get the budget, your contractor is going to help you come up with this budget and this estimate. I don't know if we're going to go through all 10 commandments, but I just want to go over some of the ones that are just super, super important. whenever you're interviewing contractors and or vetting them, and you're getting recommendations and referrals. So one of the first ones that really commandment number one is just thou shalt get all agreements in writing. So I know you have a cousin or you have an uncle or you have a relative or a friend that can do some handyman work, and they tell you, oh, I can do that for, $500, right? And it's just a verbal agreement, and, and you haven't really had a chance to look at their work. So those might not be contractors that you want to work with. But if they come to the table and they have a formal contract that basically lays out, hey, this is what we're going to do, right? These are the deliverables. This is the scope of work. This is how much is going to cost, right? Is that going to be labor and materials, or just labor? So who's responsible for materials? And this is the time frame that we're going to deliver this in. Um, Contractors usually give you like a time frame, anywhere from 1, 2, 3, 6 months, 9 months, however, whatever the scope determines for that length of time. But they have it there, right? And then in that contract, you also have ways of documenting and approving change orders, because changes do pop up when you're walking a property that you plan to rehab. You can't typically open up walls or peel back flooring and things like that. You can't really damage the house while you're walking it. But once you own the property and then you start pulling back walls, right, knocking things down, you might find termite damage or wood rot or subfloors rotted out, or maybe some unnoticed foundation repair needs to happen. So you need to have it documented in this contract. How do we handle those change orders? Because if you're just verbally asking your contractor to do things and they do those things, it's easy to forget, number one, who asked for that, and what did we ask for, and how much did it cost, or how much was quoted extra for that. But if you have a change order process that's documented in this contract, then you can just refer back to the change order when you're getting those final payments out to your contractor. So also kind of determines too, like a draw schedule as well. So draw schedule is how often is your contractor going to need to be paid? Do they need some like a down payment, or do you want to buy some materials up front and then pay them for their labor as they go through? Those kinds of details are going to be in that contract too. Okay, so make sure you get everything in writing. Okay. Another one is, since we're talking about payments, is thou shalt pay for work that has been completed, not work that has yet to start. And there's another one that goes along with that. Thou shalt only make the final payments when work is 100% complete. So when we're working with contractors, general contractors primarily, is we do give them like a down payment to get started. And this is after we've vetted the general contractor, we've checked references, we've walked job sites, we have a contract in place, so we feel comfortable enough to pay them a little bit of money up front to get started. Some general contractors have a business big enough where they can kind of float that in the beginning. Some investors don't like to do that. And what they'll do is they'll put in the contract, hey, I'll pay for all the materials, the investor, I'll pay for the materials, and then I'll pay for your labor on a weekly basis whenever the labor is done. So then you're not really giving them any money to do anything without them doing any work. They just go out to Home Depot, or they call your supplier, and the supplier calls you. You can give them the payment over the phone. They can pick up the materials, and they can begin working. So you also have to be able to inspect their work if they're asking for a payment. And so if they're telling you, hey, I know you already paid for this plumbing work to be roughed in. We have about a few other days left to complete this, but I need another payment. That's a big no-no, right? You're not going to go out and pay them for work that hasn't been completed yet. And then that takes us to the final payment. So we typically withhold anywhere from 10 to 20, sometimes 25% of the total budget. We hold onto that until 100% of the work is completed. Sometimes we hold on to a portion of that if we're flipping a house, until we actually get it under contract with a seller and the seller has looked at their inspection report and there's any inspection fixes or things that need to be addressed in that inspection report that were part of that scope of work. We want our contractor to be able to come back and make those fixes before we give them that final payment. Because if you do give them the final payment before they complete the work, they really don't have an incentive to come back, and or they don't have an incentive to come back quickly to finish the work. Obviously they don't want to like be sued or anything like that, but some people don't really have morals or ethics. They don't really care, but you don't want to pay for all of that work if it hasn't been completed yet. And you do want to withhold a little bit for the end of this project, so then they can come back and make any changes and repairs that might need to be completed. Cool. Awesome, awesome, awesome. So ties into the next thing, which is being an excellent communicator. So that's the other thing is, as an investor, you are building a business, right? And you want to be easy to work with, but you also don't want to like be a pushover either. So you can be professional with people and give them the information or communicate to them in a way that you can let them know like, hey, this needs to be done this way. Or for instance, let's say you have a specific tile pattern that you like. All right. Maybe it's herringbone. So some contractors may not know what that means. So being able to show them, hey, here's a printout or here's a screenshot or a photo. This is how we want the tile surround in this bathroom for this shower. We do things like we'll we'll print out cards and basically say, hey, this wall needs to be this color, in this room. Or like I mentioned before, we'll put printouts of tile work, flooring, the direction of the flooring, grout colors, paint colors, all those things will be on site. We give that information to the general contractor, but we also print it out and put it at the job site too. Because sometimes that general contractor, you know, doesn't necessarily communicate that information to those subcontractors that are actually doing the work. So, you want to just really be an excellent communicator there and really understanding, or so they understand exactly what you want. Part of that communication as well is under like making decisions and sticking to those decisions. We understand that plans may change, but you don't necessarily want to change the design of like your floor plan and things like that kind of last minute. You don't really want to change those too much because then number one, your costs are going to go up. And number two, those contractors, they may not want to work with you on your next project if you keep changing your mind. So, understand what you want and be able to communicate that in a way that is effective for them to get this job done, right? So so that goes in part, right? Thou shalt pay attention to the work to make sure it's done correctly. We kind of touched on that a little bit before by paying your contractors. We're not saying that you have to be well versed in construction, but you could also bring other investors who might have more experience to come take a look, walk your property with you that a contractor's been working on. If something just doesn't look right or just looks a little bit off, you can bring some other seasoned investors to kind of take a look at your project with you. Um, Read your floor plans. So if you have an architect that you're working with on your project, understanding your floor plans and where walls and doors and vanities and closets and things like that are laid out. You may not be that experienced with reading floor plans, but I think a lot of us are used to reading maps, at least Google Maps or the paper maps before. That floor plan is just a map of your house. So you should be able to, after your framing is all done, if you're doing that type of project, you should be able to just kind of walk the property and understand, hey, there should be a door here, or why is there a door frame here? This should be the shower. this should be the shower area. So Javier did join us. Thanks for joining, Javier. I've just kind of been going through some of the 10 commandments of managing contractors, going through a few of these. If you want to add some input, Javier, I've talked about, getting agreements in writing, not paying for work that hasn't been completed, and also kind of holding a little bit of that final payment, before the work is completed as well. So thanks for joining, Javier. I don't know if you can unmute yourself, and we'd love to hear from you here if your mic is working, but if not, I can just keep going on here. Okay, there we go.
No, I can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Cool.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. Actually, you talked about just mentioned about retaining a portion. This is my first time where I get a client and they mention this, and I think me as a contractor, I didn't have an issue because I know the kind of work that I turn in. But I mentioned this because this was actually the first one where I have a client that was mentioned. But then also again, having the proper contracts just for both parties to be on the same page.
Mhm.
Also having good referrals from other people that puts you ahead of other contractors that you just meet for the first time. Speaking for myself.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think like what's so important for us as investors is that referral network that you just stated is there is a lot of value when another investor refers a contractor, whether it's a general contractor or maybe it's a framer or a painter or a flooring guy. Those referrals, we do like those referrals because we know that that person has worked with this investor already. So that's super valuable. I always, I have people that reach out to me all the time for referrals, and I'll give them some referrals, when I feel comfortable doing that. But I also give them this caveat. I just let them know, like, hey, this person has done a really good job for me, very honest, good ethics. They do what they say they're going to do. They show up when they say they're going to show up. But I can't make any guarantees that they're going to do that for you. That's what they did for me, and we loved it, so we don't have a problem referring people out. But that's good, whenever someone like Javier is on the scene and he's been recommended by two or three investors, then there's a level of comfort already kind of built into that, you know. And he mentioned having a contract that both parties can agree to. So then at the end of the day, when there's questions, you just refer back to the contract, so there's no ambiguity or uncertainty of, hey, I'm going to withhold this payment, and if that wasn't a part of the contract, then Javier can push back a little bit, or if Javier's expecting to get paid like the day that his guys are done, but the contract says, hey, we're going to withhold some payment here until we can get an inspection or we list this property or things like that, then they can refer back to the contract too. But yes, contracts are super important. So I'm gonna backtrack just a little bit, Javier, on some of the things that we talked about. We talked about um, getting that contract. Javier, whenever you're walking a property with an investor, um, when you're estimating and you're bidding out these projects for people, do you typically or are your contracts, I'm sorry, are your bids typically include materials and labor, or is it on a case by case basis for you?
For most of my clients, they don't like to get too involved in projects because they're too busy. But I
Hmm.
always give them the option if they just want to buy the materials themselves, they can. It's obviously more work for them, and then there's like a bunch of little things that might not be aware of.
Hmm.
So in those instances, whenever they buy the projects, that can also be a little hiccup for me because those little things are not there that they might not be aware of. So
Right.
it's really up to them how involved they want to be in the project.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. And investors who do want to buy those materials, unless they have really good experience already, they may not understand, the types of materials like the nails or the screws or the mortar or things like that that are required, but you have an experienced contractor like Javier who's willing to do that for them and include that in the bid. That also makes sure that as long as they are making these draw payments to Javier, he can keep working, right? And he's not waiting on materials, or at least he's not waiting on materials that the investor is going to go buy. There may be a back order on materials, that's outside of his control, but he's not waiting on this investor to have sheetrock delivered or to bring the 5-gallon paint buckets, to the job site. Javier already has all this planned out where he can have these materials on site the day that he needs them. So that's just a good point too as a new investor is if you're not really experienced in ordering materials or the construction phases of a project, I think having someone like Javier that has that experience to offer that as part of his estimate, it brings a lot of value. So really good to know there too. Let's see. We talked about payments, right? So we talked about not getting those final payments, at least not until the work is 100% complete. And Javier, one thing that we were talking about when you joined the call was for you working with different types of investors, is communication important when you're working with investors? How important is that for you?
Can you repeat the question again? I'm sorry about that.
Yeah, so when you're working with different types of investors, how important is communication when you're working with those investors?
Oh, I would say this is the number one apart from the contract because if I mean you might have the greatest contract and everything, but if there's no communication, essentially that goes with trust. You kind of build the trust as you go with communication and obviously with the detailed contract. But I would say this is the number one key important thing as a contractor. At least I have witnessed this myself, little over time.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I think that there's frustration, I think, sometimes with contractors and with investors, if, for instance, an investor is changing their mind a lot about the design or tile choice or things like that, or like that's how a contractor can get frustrated with an investor. An investor can also get frustrated with a contractor if, for instance, let's say part of the contract says that the investor is responsible for purchasing finishes, so things like plumbing fixtures and light fixtures, or maybe a specific tile and things like that. And so the investor is ready to do that. Just let me know when and how many I need. But sometimes the contractor who may not have good communication skills might call that investor the morning of and say, I need the tile, right? Instead of, hey, in 3 days, we're going to start tiling. Or can you have the tile there in a couple days because we're going to start tiling in 2 to 3 days, Or can you have the light fixtures that you want, the chandelier or the pendant lights? Can you have them there on Monday because we're going to do the final trim out? So that's why it's also important that communication is a two-way street, right? Javier loves working with investors who communicate well, and investors love working with contractors who communicate well. So super important. Like he said, that's probably one of the most important things with these projects is that communication style. You know. Um,
Also,
Another thing. Yeah, yeah, go ahead.
something that I want to mention with this. I recently worked with a new investor slash realtor. They wanted to be basically hands on, and this was like a middle income property. And they bought a lot of fixtures and stuff, but the thing is that they look nice, but they also look very cheap for the
Mm,
neighborhood that they were doing. So even though they wanted to get involved, I feel like a lot for the new ones at least, they don't know. They can't really gauge what's supposed to be in certain neighborhoods, and that's another thing that I would say be aware. I know you might be on a budget, but that might actually hurt you when, for example, when it comes to selling.
yes. No, that's a good point. So again, somebody like Javier who brings experience because he has worked on dozens of properties or maybe more than that. So, and he's in different areas of town, different parts of Houston and suburbs and things like that. So he's in different neighborhoods. So he has a wealth of experience that he can bring to the table. Whereas if you're a new investor and this is your very first project, it probably is a good idea to listen to Javier and ask him for suggestions on fixtures. He may even have better places for you to buy them, right? That might be better quality, but might just cost just a little bit less than buying them from Home Depot or something like that. So, yes, depending on your contractor for their experience, at least to get some of their input, yeah, it's going to be super valuable. So Rick asked a quick question, Javier. He says, is the material markup by contractors the reason investors buy their material? So what he's asking is, do investors typically buy their materials because they don't want to pay a markup by contractors? Do you see that often, Javier, or have you heard that from investors?
Well, to tell you the truth, I actually recently came about this. I didn't know contractors weren't doing this until recently I found out. But
Mm,
I wasn't, or I'm still not doing markup. Obviously, if I have a new client, I try to give them I guess, a good enough estimate with no markup and everything. Just, I guess, so I can get in the door and build a relationship from there. And
right.
but yeah,
Yeah.
this is something new for me. But I didn't know that people were actually doing it.
Yeah, some people do that. They'll add like another 10% sometimes, to try to account for just their time back and forth, getting things off the shelf and whatnot. I've never seen an itemized bid, Rick, that shows any kind of markup. But it doesn't mean that the contractors I've worked with in the past aren't doing it. Um, but typically whenever an investor who wants to buy their own materials, Javier or his crew or someone from his team is going to be at Home Depot or the supplier, and the supplier are going to call them directly, for a credit card, for instance, to make that payment. So then, as far as marking up there's not really an opportunity to do that. Now they may add a little bit, right, for time to go back and forth, but I think sometimes it's hard to trace unless they're putting it on their bid. Hey, materials are going to be, $1,500, and it's going to be another 150, on top of that for our markup to go purchase those things. So I know it does happen though, Rick, and Javier confirmed that too. But I don't think, yeah, I think for me, my time is valuable, and I'd rather, if my contractor was marking up, I think I would be okay with that because I wouldn't really want to slow the project down because I was busy off doing something else and my general contractor needed something at the job site. So, yeah, that's a good question. Thanks.
Yeah, I would definitely say this is normal because in long projects, you spend essentially, you can spend even weeks just back and forth getting little things here and there. And that's essentially uh, a waste of time for the contractor if he's not charging for that. Or, I mean, the client can also do it, but that can also kind of be a little problem if they're new, like I said before.
Hmm. Yeah.
But
Yeah.
yes, I think this is totally normal. It's they do it or the contractor does it, but someone has to spend time getting materials.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's it. Someone's got to spend some time doing it. It's cool. Yeah, I'll let the contractor handle it. So I'm gonna go over some of these other Ten Commandments too to kind of round out the last 15 minutes we have here. So one thing that's important for investors is getting multiple bids for their job. So you have a general contractor like Javier. He's got people that he works with, that he has a team. He's got subs. He's got the resources, so he can come out and bid your entire project for you. Is that right, Javier? You can bid a full gut rehab or a cosmetic renovation, right? You can do that for people.
Yes, we can definitely do that.
Yeah, yeah. So, it's also important too as an investor to increase your network of other general contractors or other subcontractors and things like that. So then you can get another bid from another contractor. I would say when you're doing that, to be sure that you're comparing apples to apples, and for instance, we're talking about materials and labor a lot, right? Is making sure that both of those general contractors are bidding out materials and labor or just labor, right? So you understand the differences in those numbers. And it would be helpful for the contractor if you had a scope of work or a statement of work already ready to go. You might walk the property once or twice with the GC and really kind of pointing some things out like, hey, we're going to move a wall here. We want all new windows. We need a new roof. I need a new electrical panel, like all those things, right? But when you get into the details, if you can just really document all that and then send it back to that contractor. So then when they're writing up their estimate or they're coming up with their estimate, they understand exactly what you talked about. A lot of contractors write things down. Some people record the conversation. We, like us, my wife and I, we type everything up when we're done walking the property and we send it over to the contractor. Because then who's responsible at that point? Me. I'm responsible. So if that contractor gives me his estimate and I accept it and we're working on this project and now I'm talking to him about a tile surround in the shower and he's like, that's going to be extra. I'm like, what do you mean that's extra? Right? That we walked through and we talked about that. He can easily go back and say that wasn't on the scope of work that you emailed me. Right? So it puts the responsibility back on the investor, and that's where it should be, right? Not on the contractor who forgot about something and now he's got to charge you extra. So that goes back with this communication style and really helping that contractor understand exactly what you want, right? Documenting all of this. And then we even, after they send the estimate, I then call my general contractor and let's go over this line by line to make sure that you haven't forgotten something or make sure that you have read this scope of work completely, every detail. And sometimes I forget about something when we do that and I've got to add it there, right? And that'll just add a little bit to the scope. So getting multiple bids, right? Comparing apples to apples, getting a documented scope of work out to your contractor so they're competing on the same level playing field, if that makes sense. Okay. What about permits? So let's talk about permits. Javier, I know you have some experience there. I have some experience. I have experience doing work without permits, like when are permits actually required? And sometimes permits are not required. Rick, we're going to come back to that question in just a minute. We're going to talk about permits here just really quick. So, Javier, in your experience, does every single project that you work on, is a city permit required for every single project?
I mean, from my point of view, I think the city wants you to involve them as much as possible, but I think it's not really needed as long as everything gets done to code. At least speaking for myself, we give the option for the client if they want to put permits or not. But regardless of that, we essentially do everything up to code, permit or no permit. But if they want to go the extra mile and spend more, it's really up to them.
Yeah, yeah. It depends on the city. I think that the municipality, the location, because I've done some work in Galveston where we were just replacing flooring and countertops and cabinets. And I went to the permit office. I told them what I was doing. They said, you don't need a permit for that. I'm like, okay, all right. But there were other projects where we're doing structural changes like foundation repair, we're removing walls, we're replacing a roof, siding, windows, electrical, plumbing. We're doing like a full gut rehab on those properties. Then, yes, we want to go have a permit and get a permit from the city. Now, I've seen municipalities or someone at the permit office saying I didn't need a permit for something and we started the work and I got red tagged and I had to go back to the city and get a permit based off of the first thing that I said because they saw a dumpster out front and they said, "Well, you're doing more than flooring, cabinets, and countertops." Like, okay. So I think it's also important too if you're trying to sell the property, like your intent is to flip this property, then if you're doing work on the property, I think it's best to get a permit because if you're doing that work without a permit, you also have to disclose that, whenever you go sell the property. So I like to try to take away as much negotiating power of any, prospective buyers that are in the market. And one way that I can take away a piece of negotiation tool is by permitting all this work. And then showing that the final inspections were done and the permits actually got closed out. You know, yes, you can trust Javier and people like Javier. You can trust that they're going to do everything to code. And sometimes the city codes that they're going to inspect are maybe even above and beyond kind of what some of the standard building codes might be for specific reasons, in that municipality. But it's another way to kind of hold everyone accountable again, right? Is if you've got this permit and you've got these city inspections that happen, then Javier's not perfect. Maybe he made a mistake. Maybe he didn't put fire rated sheetrock on this wall that was close to the property line, but the city inspector came and saw that and said, hey, we got to redo this. Cool. We caught it and we're going to go and fix it. So having those city permits and those city inspections, they can be a pain at times, but they help hold everyone accountable too. And offer you like an incentive for whenever you're selling that property. If it's a flip, your property may be a little bit more attractive if there's an equitable property nearby that hasn't done the work with permits, if that makes sense, right? So yeah, so permits important. The other thing too is making sure that one of the other commandments of managing contractors is that you hire contractors that are trained to do the specific job. You know, um, be careful of the person that says, I can do all of it. You know, this probably he can probably do it all, or he or she can probably do it all, but probably not very good at doing it all. So, right, I mean, you've got framers, you've got tile work people, you've got flooring people, sheetrock that are really great at, taping and mudding and floating and all that good stuff. You got painters, that are good at paint and texture and prep work and all that good stuff, right? And then you've got your foundation and roofing crews, and you got electrical and plumbing, right? So all of these people, if they're trained specifically to do a job, they're probably going to be better at it, right? So you want to make sure whenever you're getting bids, or you've got a subcontractor coming out taking a look at your project with you to get you a bid, is you want to make sure that they are licensed, right? Especially if you're getting permits, Rick, then those plumbers, electricians, HVAC techs, roofers, they definitely have to be licensed and probably have to be insured as well in that particular city, in order to pull a permit for you. Okay. So, very important. Hiring somebody like Javier, who's a general contractor, he's going to make sure that the people that he's bringing into your project are well trained and knowledgeable and know how to complete that specific task for your project. Because, like he mentioned before, all of this stuff needs to be up to code. The quality needs to be good because this reflects on him and his business, right? So he's got a little bit of skin in the game. He's got his reputation on the line. So he wants to make sure that he has well trained and knowledgeable people that are working on your particular project. You know, so we talked about bids, right, earlier, and Rick had a good question, and Javier, this is a good one too, for you. Is that, do contractors charge for bids? Is that do you charge for bids, Javier?
Not at the moment, but earlier you mentioned about having a list before the contractor went, and also I guess after they turn in the estimate, just well, right before they turn in the estimate, just to send them a detailed list from the client's
Mm-hmm.
perspective, and then another one.
Mm-hmm.
Well, obviously, I think that all contractors take notes somehow whenever they go out and meet the clients. But I mentioned this because recently I've been meeting a couple of clients that they kind of don't know what they're doing and they're just kind of guessing, and then that puts me out like almost half of day
Yeah.
because it might be far. They take like 2 hours just meeting them. So essentially, that kind of messes with my daily plans. So what I started recently incorporating, I just give them 1 hour max. Anything after 1 hour, I charge.
Yeah, that's good. I think that's fair, because I mean that gives you an opportunity to kind of get yourself in the door, right? Because obviously you want to build your business, you want to win the business, so you don't necessarily want to turn everyone away by, charging some large fee just to go out and walk a property. But it also respects how valuable your time is as well, right? So I think that 1 hour up front for, hey, I'll come walk this property with you for an hour. After that, it's going to be an additional charge. I think that's really fair. Um, I think too, though, as you build a relationship, Javier, with investors, like let's say, for instance, you've done one or two projects, of different scopes, different scale projects with this particular investor, then you may be more open to walking a property that investor may not have under contract yet. Is that right? Like if you already have this relationship with them?
Yes, I bet exactly. So I already have a relationship, and I kind of know that they're not messing around with my time and just making me lose time. So, but with
Right.
the new ones, yes, I'm more upfront with charging them and being clear with this.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the other things too, Rick, that's important to know when you're talking to general contractors or just you're getting bids, at least in my experience, and Javier can chime in here in a second. In my experience, I'm not expecting an itemized bid until I accept their bid. So I've gotten verbal or just the email or text saying like, hey, and this is just after walking the property, right? They'll just text me and just say, hey, I'm in this range. Like, it'll probably be about 30 to 35,000 to do kind of what you want to do, right? And then if I'm like, okay, great, that number works for me. Okay, I'm gonna send you over the scope of work that fits my budget. I'm gonna go make my offer, and then once the offer is accepted and I'm under contract, then I might tell Javier or my general contractor, hey, let's itemize that thing to make sure, let's fine tune those numbers, right? To make sure we're all on the same page and we're talking about the same thing and those numbers make sense. Because then I know I'm gonna close on that property and I've hired Javier, so he knows he's got the job. So he's probably willing to put a little bit more effort because doing these itemized bids, those aren't things that can get done in 10 minutes. Sometimes those can take several hours, to make sure he's getting all of his numbers right. Maybe he's calling suppliers or he's looking online at pricing. He's estimating, the amount of materials and things like that he's going to need as part of his budget. That's a very detailed and long process. So don't be surprised if you walk a property with a contractor and you ask them for a detailed itemized bid and they say no. All right. Or worse, they say okay and they just never send it to you, but they might just say no, right? Let's see how far we get in this process. And if you decide to hire me based off this estimate, then I can give you this estimated, or this itemized bid. Yeah, but that does take some time for them. So just kind of be mindful of that too. Um, and I think kind of the last thing too that I just think with any business, whether it's as an investor, Javier and his contracting business that he has, and everyone else on the call is you have to be a strong leader, right? And it kind of just takes into account all of these things that we've talked about already, right? Having good communication, all right? Having strong ethics, right? Being fair with people, being, fair with their time, understanding how valuable their time is, and learning through the process, understanding as much as you can about construction and things like you don't have to go swing a hammer, but just try to learn as much as you can about a construction project or a rehab project. So then when you're walking projects with Javier or someone else, you actually know a little bit more through each iteration of what you want, what your style is. That's going to help in your communication. Javier is going to be better, he's going to better understand exactly what you're asking for, what you're looking for. So all of that kind of well-rounded into like being a strong leader. So, Javier, do you have anything else that you wanted to add before we wrap up here? No?
I think cover a lot of things here, but nothing comes to mind so far.
Yeah. Yeah, we did cover a lot. Let's see. Rick said, do contractors use like a square foot price? So I think, for instance, let's say the house is 1,000 square feet and you walk the property. Do you ever price your bids on or price your jobs on, okay, that's going to be $45 a square foot to rehab this property? Do you ever use that type of pricing method, Javier?
Yes. So I would say this is it really depends, but yes and no. It really depends on the situation. But it definitely helps as a I guess immediate thing to gauge about how much X is going to cost. But
Yeah,
there's situations where you can really go off based on square footage because sometimes, let's say, painting or doing a backsplash has many details that you have to do around it, so you can't really go based on the square footage. It's more about how much time you think you're gonna spend doing
right.
those little things.
Yeah, some of those details. I think if you're getting just some high level estimating, right, for budgeting, Rick, you know, I used to kind of go off this rule of thumb. Like if it was just a cosmetic rehab, so we're talking about like paint, flooring, that's kind of it. Like I'm not really touching the mechanicals. I'm not, maybe even countertops might be involved there, but I'm not moving walls. I'm not replacing any large structural items or roofing and things like that. I would kind of go like $35 a square foot around that. And then as the renovation became more advanced and kind of complicated, then your price per square foot, would kind of go up from that point. But I've done that in the past too, is just a kind of back of the napkin kind of budgeting, to trust if I don't have a contractor that can kind of, walk the property with me. We have a tool that we use. It's called Deal Smart Pro. It's a website that we use to, it's like $10 a month or something like that, that I use instead of using spreadsheets and things like that. It's a pretty cool tool. I can add like the ARV and I can start plugging in numbers like how many windows, how much square footage is it, how many doors, are we doing a full replacement on the foundation and roof, like all those things. It gets it itemized, and that gives me a really good kind of back of the napkin estimate. So then I can go make my offers from that. That tool is called Deal Smart Pro. You can look that up online. It's a pretty cool tool. But that brings us to the end of our call. I appreciate y'all's patience getting started here. And Javier, I appreciate your time so much, man. Thank you for joining us. I'm gonna reach out to you. I think I have your number too. I'm gonna reach out to you. We have a project in Northeast Houston that we have under contract. That's kind of it's kind of a hoarder house. There's a lot of junk in it, but I think the renovation might be pretty straightforward. But I'm gonna give you a call, man, pretty soon. Maybe you can walk that property with me in a couple weeks. Cool.
Yeah, definitely. And this was a very informative session that we had today.
Yeah, awesome. All right, everyone. Y'all have a good day, and we'll see you next week. Bye.